My friends, there are moments in life when a door swings open before us, not an ordinary door, the kind that creaks on rusty hinges, leading from one dimly lit corridor to another, but a door of significance, a portal to something far greater than we ever imagined. It stands ajar, its light spilling onto the threshold of our lives, beckoning us forward, and yet, how often do we hesitate? How often do we pretend not to see it, busying ourselves with lesser things, convincing ourselves that the light is an illusion? We hesitate out of fear, out of comfort, or most tragically, out of the belief that such a door is meant for someone else, some greater soul, some worthier traveler. Here's an expanded version of the first key point written in a style that echoes C.S. Lewis's depth and thoughtfulness. There are certain moments in life when we sense a shift, an unseen hand moving the pieces of our existence into place, aligning circumstances in a way that seems too precise to be coincidence. We may call these moments chance, fate, or even luck, but in truth, they are none of these things. They are doors opened deliberately, intentionally, by the one who knows us better than we know ourselves. It is easy to go through life believing that we are simply wandering, that we are left to make sense of the world as best we can, stumbling through opportunities when they happen to come our way. But this is not the way of things. If we truly understood the nature of the one who governs all, we would recognize that there is no such thing as a meaningless moment, no step we take that is unseen or unconsidered. Every decision, every meeting, every unexpected turn is part of a grand design, a story in which we are both participants and beloved characters. And in this story, there are certain doors that are not merely options, but invitations, clear, divine opportunities set before us by God Himself. The nature of these doors varies. Some appear in the form of great decisions, choices that may alter the course of our lives. A new calling, a new direction, a path we never imagined for ourselves. Others come more subtly, disguised as small nudges in our hearts, a persistent thought we cannot shake, a stirring deep within us that suggests we are being led toward something beyond our comfort, beyond the familiar. And still others appear through the circumstances we did not choose, trials, losses, disruptions, that, though painful, push us toward a place we never would have ventured on our own. The difficulty is not in the presence of the door, but in recognizing it for what it is. Too often, we dismiss divine opportunities as mere coincidences, failing to see the fingerprints of God upon them. We hesitate because we expect the grand movements of God to come with thunderclaps and burning bushes, not in quiet moments of decision. But in truth, His ways are often subtle, His voice a whisper rather than a shout. The door may not seem grand, the opportunity may not seem remarkable, and yet it is no less real. There is in each of us a deep longing for purpose, a desire to know that our lives are part of something greater, that we are meant for more than mere existence. We search for meaning in achievements, in relationships, in the approval of others, but these things, though good, do not satisfy in the way we expect. What we truly seek is the path we were made for, the road that has been prepared for us from the very beginning, and this road is not found by accident. It is revealed in those moments when God places a door before us, not as a test, not as a trick, but as an act of love, a way forward, a way home. Some might argue that if God opens a door, it will be unmistakable, impossible to ignore. But this is not always the case. God does not force us through. He invites. He does not demand, He beckons. Love, by its very nature, does not coerce, and so He allows us the dignity of choice, the freedom to step forward or to turn away. And herein lies the great mystery. A door can stand wide open, but it remains meaningless to the one who refuses to walk through it. At times, we may question whether a door is truly from God. We may wonder if we are imagining it, if we are reading too much into the circumstances before us. And while caution and discernment are necessary, we must be equally wary of the temptation to dismiss every opportunity as uncertainty. Faith, after all, is not the absence of doubt, but the willingness to step forward despite it. There is a danger in assuming that divine opportunities are only for the strong, the wise, the obviously qualified. Many of us think too little of ourselves, believing that God's plans are for someone else, someone more deserving. But the truth is that God has always called the unlikely, the hesitant, the ones who feel unready. Moses was reluctant, Gideon was fearful, Peter was impulsive, and yet each of them was given a door, an opportunity to step into something beyond themselves. Not because they were qualified, but because they were called. And that is what truly matters. So when the door comes, and it will come, do not dismiss it. Do not assume it is for another. Do not let fear convince you that you are not enough. The one who opened it knows you. He sees what you do not see in yourself. He understands your weaknesses and your doubts, and still he calls you forward. A door stands before you, not by chance, not by accident, but by design. The question is not whether God has opened a door for you, but whether you will have the courage to walk through it. There is a peculiar thing about fear. It does not always come in the form of terror. It does not always arrive as a sudden jolt, as something that grips us violently and shakes us awake. More often, it is subtle, slow-moving, whispering in the quiet moments, planting small doubts in the mind until we find ourselves frozen, unable to take a step forward. Fear is clever. It does not usually tell us outright that we should not go through the door before us. Instead, it suggests that we wait, that we gather more information, that we make absolutely certain before we act, and so we hesitate. The great tragedy is that many never walk through the doors God opens for them, not because they consciously reject Him, but because they simply delay. They tell themselves they will step forward eventually when they feel more ready, when they have more clarity, when the risk is not so great. But delay is not neutral. It is a decision in itself. The door stands open, and yet by doing nothing, we silently choose to remain where we are. This hesitation often comes disguised as wisdom. We tell ourselves that we are being cautious, that we are waiting for the right time. But what if the right time is now? What if the opportunity before us is not one that will linger indefinitely? What if the door we hesitate to walk through will one day close, not because God is unkind, but because the nature of doors is to be walked through, not merely admired? Fear does not always look like fear. Sometimes it looks like comfort. We grow accustomed to the life we have, even if it is less than what it could be. We know its rhythms, its struggles, its limitations, and there is something strangely reassuring about familiarity, even when it is not ideal. The unknown, on the other hand, is terrifying. The door before us may lead to something greater, but it may also lead to difficulty, to challenge, to sacrifice. And so we cling to what we know, preferring the safety of the present over the uncertainty of the future. But what if we could see beyond our immediate fears? What if we could glimpse the life that awaits on the other side of obedience? Would we still hesitate? If we knew that stepping through would bring us into a deeper understanding of God's purpose, into a richer and more meaningful existence, would we still choose to remain where we are? It is a strange thing that we often pray for guidance, for direction, for purpose, and yet when the answer comes in the form of an open door, we shrink back. We ask God for clarity, but what we really mean is that we want to see the entire journey before we take the first step. But this is not how God leads. He does not reveal the whole path at once. He asks us to trust. He gives us a door, and He asks us to walk through. There is a cost to staying where we are. We may not feel it at first, but over time, something in us begins to wither. We were made to grow, to change, to be stretched beyond ourselves. And when we refuse to step forward, we slowly become stagnant. A life lived in hesitation is a life that never truly embraces the fullness of what it was meant to be. And more than that, it is a life that misses the joy of partnership with God, of seeing Him work in ways we never could have imagined. of experiencing the wonder of walking in step with His will. There will always be reasons to wait. There will always be uncertainties, unanswered questions, and risks. But if we spend our lives waiting for the perfect conditions, we will never move. There is a moment when we must decide that trust is greater than fear, that obedience is more important than comfort, that the possibility of what lies ahead is worth more than the security of what we leave behind. Perhaps you stand before a door now, one that has been open for some time. Perhaps you have felt the nudge, the quiet stirring in your soul, the gentle but persistent pull towards something new. And perhaps, like so many before you, you have hesitated. You have weighed the risks, considered the costs, and wondered whether you are truly ready. But let me tell you this, you will never feel completely ready. No one ever does. Readiness is not a prerequisite for stepping through the door, faith is. The question is not whether the door is open, the question is whether you will trust the one who opened it. When a door opens before us, we often fall into the mistake of believing it is just one of many possibilities, a random occurrence in the course of life. But this is not so. If God has opened a door, it is not by accident. It is not a mere coincidence, nor is it a trivial choice among countless others. It is intentional, it is specific, it is part of a divine plan that has been in motion long before we ever became aware of it. And yet we often hesitate as if this door is optional, as if it is something we can ignore without consequence. God does not open doors thoughtlessly. He does not place opportunities in our lives only to watch us fumble with indecision. If a door stands before you, it is because He has designed it for you. Yes, you in all your weaknesses, fears, and uncertainties. This is the part we so often struggle to believe. We can accept that God calls others, those who seem stronger, wiser, better prepared, but when it comes to ourselves, we resist. We assume we must have misheard. We convince ourselves that we are not ready, not worthy, not capable. But this line of thinking is not humility, it is unbelief. It is a failure to trust that God knows exactly what He is doing. Consider how often in Scripture God called those who felt inadequate. Moses stood before the burning bush and argued that he was not eloquent enough. Gideon hid in fear, doubting that he had what it took to lead. Jeremiah protested that he was too young. Peter, after failing spectacularly, went back to fishing, believing his calling had passed him by. But in each case, God did not choose them because of their abilities. He chose them because He had a purpose for them. And He knew that His power, working through their weaknesses, would be enough. This is the truth we must hold on to. If God has opened a door for you, it is because He intends for you to walk through it. He does not make mistakes, He does not miscalculate, and He does not waste His invitations. We often convince ourselves that if we do not step forward, the opportunity will simply be given to someone else, that we are interchangeable, that God will find another way. But what if that is not true? What if the door before you is uniquely yours? What if what lies beyond it is not just a general opportunity, but a specific calling tailor-made for the person God created you to be? To turn away from it is not just to delay or to choose another path, it is to walk away from something you were meant to step into. Some believe that if a door is truly from God, it will come without obstacles. They assume that divine opportunities will always be clear, effortless, and free of struggle. But more often than not, God's doors require faith to step through. They require courage. They require the willingness to walk forward even when the path is uncertain. This is because God is not only interested in the work we will do on the other side of the door, He is also interested in what the journey through it will shape in us. A door opened by God does not mean a life without difficulty. It does not mean that everything will be simple, that there will be no opposition, no moments of doubt. In fact, the very presence of difficulty is often a sign that we are stepping into something important. If there were no challenges, no risks, no need for faith, then what kind of journey would it be? A life lived within the confines. Faith is a strange thing. We speak of it often, we admire it in others, and we long to have more of it ourselves. And yet, when the time comes to actually exercise faith, we hesitate. We want certainty. We want to see the entire road ahead before we take the first step. But this is not how faith works. Faith is not the absence of uncertainty. It is the choice to move forward despite it. It is the willingness to trust that when God opens a door, He does not do so carelessly, nor does He expect us to walk through it alone. God asks us to trust Him, and that trust is tested most when we are called to step beyond what we can control. It is easy to believe in God when we are not required to act. It is easy to say that we trust Him when our feet are planted firmly on the ground. But faith is proven in movement. It is revealed when we take a step into the unknown, when we say yes to the door that He has opened, even when we do not understand what lies beyond it. The difficulty is that we often want guarantees. We want to know before we step forward that everything will go well, that we will not fail, that the path ahead will be smooth. But God does not promise us comfort, He promises us Himself. And He asks us to trust that He is enough. This is the test of faith, not whether we believe in God in theory, but whether we are willing to follow Him in practice. Whether we will move when He says move, whether we will go where He calls us even when we do not know where the road will lead. Throughout Scripture, we see this pattern again and again. Abraham was called to leave his home without knowing where he was going. Peter was called to step out of the boat onto the water. The Israelites were called to march around Jericho without knowing how the walls would fall. In each case, the command was not to understand, but to obey, not to have all the answers, but to trust the one who gave the instruction. And in each case, it was in the stepping forward that they saw God's power at work. Had they waited for certainty, for full understanding, they would have remained where they were. This is where so many of us find ourselves, standing before an open door, knowing that God is calling us forward and yet hesitating because we cannot see beyond the threshold. We analyze, we question, we look for a way to guarantee success before we move. But this is not faith, this is control, and control is the enemy of trust. As long as we insist on understanding everything before we act, we will never truly experience what it means to walk by faith. God does not call us to blind leaps into the dark, but He does call us to trust that He sees what we cannot. A child holding their father's hand does not need to know every step of the journey. They only need to know that they are with someone who will not let them fall. And this is the kind of trust we are called to have. Not trust in circumstances, not trust in our own ability to navigate the unknown, but trust in the one who has already gone before us. There will always be reasons to hesitate. There will always be voices telling us to wait, to reconsider, to turn back. The enemy of our souls delights in making us second-guess the doors God has opened, whispering that we are not ready, that we are not worthy, that we will surely fail. But these are lies. If God has opened a door, He has already equipped us to walk through it. If He has called us forward, He will provide what we need along the way. Our job is not to have all the answers. Our job is to step forward in faith. The greatest adventures of life are found on the other side of obedience. The greatest stories of faith begin when we choose to move forward despite our fears. And the greatest tragedies are found in life spent waiting for the perfect moment, the perfect assurance, the perfect set of conditions before taking a step. But that moment never comes. At some point, we must decide that trust is enough, that the voice of God is enough, that the open door before us is not there by chance, but by divine intention, and that the one who called us to walk through it will be with us every step of the way. There is a moment in every decision when hesitation begins to feel reasonable. We tell ourselves we need more time, that we should wait for a clearer sign, that perhaps the door will still be there tomorrow. But what if it will not? What if the opportunity before us is not one that remains open indefinitely? What if hesitation, which seems so harmless, is in fact the quiet closing of a door we were meant to walk through? God in His mercy opens doors for us, but He does not force us through them. He invites, He beckons, He provides the way forward, but He does not strip us of the responsibility to respond. And yet, so many of us stand before open doors and never move, not because we do not want what is beyond them, but because we convince ourselves that we have more time, that we can wait, that the same opportunity will always be there when we are finally ready. But what if delay is not neutral? What if delay in itself is a choice to refuse what God is offering, even if we do not consciously mean to refuse it? The assumption that we can take our time, that God will always wait for us to be comfortable, is a dangerous one. Yes, He is patient, and yes, He is gracious, but He is also a God of seasons. There are moments He appoints, times He ordains, and windows that do not stay open forever. Think of Noah. God gave him a period of time to build the ark, but there came a day when the door was shut. Think of the Israelites who stood on the edge of the promised land and hesitated, only to find that when they finally decided to move, the opportunity had passed. The door was closed, and their hesitation cost them 40 years of wandering. How many times have we in our own lives missed something because we assumed the door would always be there? How many blessings, relationships, callings, and moments of growth have we forfeited simply because we lingered too long in hesitation? We like to think that if we refuse now, God will always bring the same opportunity around again, that we will have another chance later, and sometimes He does, but sometimes the moment was meant for now. Sometimes what is available today will not be available tomorrow. And we do not realize what we have lost until it is too late. It is not that God punishes hesitation, but that some doors were never meant to stay open forever. He places opportunities in our path at the right time, but if we continually resist, if we keep telling ourselves that we will step forward eventually, we may find that eventually never comes. The tragedy is that we do not always see what we are missing. We do not know what was waiting for us on the other side of our obedience. We only know the safe, predictable life we chose instead. And perhaps, years later, we feel a quiet sense of loss, a whisper of regret, as we wonder what could have been if only we had moved when we were called. God's plans do not depend on our readiness. They depend on our willingness. He does not require us to be perfect, fully prepared, or fearless. He only asks that we trust Him enough to walk forward when He calls. The enemy knows this, which is why he works so hard to convince us to delay. He does not need us to reject God outright. He only needs us to wait long enough that the opportunity passes. He knows that a postponed act of faith is often a faith never acted upon at all. Some of us have doors before us now, decisions we have been wrestling with, invitations we have been afraid to accept, paths we have felt drawn to but have not yet taken. And deep down, we know that these are not just our own ideas. We know that God has been stirring something in us, calling us towards something greater, but still, we hesitate. We wait for absolute certainty, for the removal of all risk, for the perfect moment when fear will finally disappear. But that moment never comes. Faith is not the absence of fear, it is the willingness to move forward despite it. The longer we wait, the easier it becomes to stay where we are. The longer we delay, the more comfortable inaction feels. And one day we wake up and realize that the door is no longer there. Not because God is unkind, but because the season has passed, and what was once an opportunity is now only a memory of what could have been. If a door is before you, do not assume it will always be there. If God is calling you forward, do not delay until you feel ready. Readiness is not the requirement, obedience is. The time to move is not tomorrow, the time is now. When God opens a door, it is not only an opportunity, but a divine invitation to step into something greater than ourselves. Yet many of us stand at the threshold, weighing the risks, counting the costs, and wondering if we are truly capable of walking through. What we fail to realize is that what lies on the other side is not just about us. It is about something far bigger than we can imagine. The doors God opens are not only for our benefit, but for His greater purpose. And when we refuse to walk through them, we are not just delaying our own progress, we are delaying something He intends to accomplish through us. One of the greatest lies we tell ourselves is that our obedience or disobedience affects only us. That if we hesitate, it is only our own life that will be impacted. But this is not true. Our choices ripple outward, touching lives in ways we may never fully understand. When God calls us to step forward, it is often because there are others waiting on the other side of our obedience. People we do not even know yet, people who will be affected by our faithfulness or our hesitation. Consider how many stories in Scripture hinge on the obedience of one person. What if Noah had ignored the command to build the ark? What if Esther had remained silent instead of approaching the king? What if Paul had refused to leave his old life behind? In every case, their willingness to step through the door God opened did not just change their own lives, it altered the course of history for countless others. The same is true for us. We may not see the full picture, but our decision to move forward or stay behind has consequences beyond what we can perceive. Often we hesitate because we think too much about ourselves, our inadequacies, our fears, our limitations. We assume that God must have chosen the wrong person, that surely someone else is better equipped for the task. But this is where we misunderstand His ways. God does not choose based on human qualifications. He does not open doors only for the strong, the prepared, or the fearless. He calls the willing. He equips those who say yes. And He does not ask us to walk through the door alone. He promises to go before us, to strengthen us, and to accomplish what He has set before us in His power, not ours. There is a subtle arrogance in thinking that our weaknesses can override God's plans, that somehow our limitations are greater than His ability to use us. But throughout history, He has chosen the least likely people to accomplish the most extraordinary thing. Moses, slow of speech, became a leader. David, the overlooked shepherd,